I know all the fighters, and they're all on steroids.
Stakes tomorrow night, my friend. All the needles in your ass, all the steroids will not help you.
And do you believe John Jones is a cheater?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Everybody's on steroids.
The use of steroids and performance-enhancing drugs has been one of the most controversial topics in professional sports since the 80s.
Steroids?
Steroids.
Steroids.
And the application of them in MMA has been no exception.
In this day and age, with everything that's going on in sports, if you're taking steroids, you're a moron.
They're the scourge of the sport, and we've got to get rid of them. It's an epidemic.
You know, I've said this for a long time. I think it should be a lifetime ban, first offense.
If you take steroids, you can kiss my ass.
Today, we'll look at the history of drug testing in the UFC and the various controversies that have followed it along the way.
They're all on steroids.
Only weight I care about. Steroids? What are you talking about, steroids? I'll be talking before my name is steroids. I'm majored against that.
Are athletes still able to find loopholes for steroid use?
The secret jewels.
Why has the UFC ditched USADA?
They said that the reason why the UFC is leaving this relationship with USADA was because they were trying to get Conor McGregor and not have to test him.
Does drug testing even matter to us anymore?
You're going to have combat sports, so you'll have MMA. Maybe it's actually safer for the athletes if they're enhanced.
And is there potentially something even more sinister about the new drug testing program that's been put in place? In the early years of the UFC, rules were proudly advertised as not really a thing over here.
No rules, no judges' scores, and no time limits.
Unsurprisingly, this relaxed attitude also extended to its enforcement surrounding steroid use, and like many sports in the 80s and 90s, it really helped get the crowd going to see freak athletes compete against one another. However, as the war on drugs came to the forefront of American politics, many began pointing to the seemingly rampant drug use going on in some professional sports. As drug use became intertwined with morality, being seen as a clean athlete became vital to maintaining a good public image.
How could it have taken place when I've never taken performance-enhancing drugs?
Train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, be true to yourself, true to your country, be a real American.
As the UFC grew in popularity, the need to clean up the image of the sport became paramount. This not only included adjusting the rule set for a mainstream audience, but also drug testing athletes to prove they were just as legitimate as every other mainstream sport. This was mostly carried out by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, which would test some fighters in competition and eventually expand to some random out-of-competition testing weeks before a fight as well. However, due to the lack of funding and resources, the NSAC was unable to really do much meaningful testing, with many referring to the drug testing as more of an IQ test than anything else. Fighters could easily predict when they would be tested, and in many gyms, PED use was still very much a normal part of training camp.
Where I was at, team and people are around, this was part of it. You're gonna run on this day, you're gonna box on this, you're gonna lift on this, go see the doctor on this day. It was part of it.
Black Zillions, along with I believe it's American Top Team, ATT, were involved in the Biogenesis Clinic drug scandal and numerous other scandals, apparently.
Fortunately for the UFC, it was relatively rare that any of its star athletes would get caught by the commission. And although many fighters knew the loopholes to continue using steroids, the majority of viewers had now assumed they'd cleaned up the sport. Nevertheless, what was about to come next was so egregious, it would be impossible for even the most naive of fans not to notice. Testosterone replacement therapy, or TRT, was given the green light by athletic commissions in 2008 and quickly became a matter of controversy amongst fighters and fans alike.
But I think where the waters really got murky is when TRT came in.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you need TRT? Like, why do you need that? You're looking for an advantage.
TRT, people don't know what it is, so everyone yells and screams that it's, you know, the devil.
So, what exactly is TRT?
Let's be clear, it is steroids. It's just not steroid use. You're getting a doctor, an endocrinologist, to analyze your profile, and then he or she will provide you with the adequate amount of testosterone to get you to a healthy level.
The result is more muscle, better recovery from exercise, and improved speed, strength, endurance, not only in training but in competition.
Some viewed this as a legitimate form of medicinal therapy and felt that if a doctor prescribes an aging fighter TRT, then it should be treated the same as any other medical condition.
I believe TRT, if it is medically founded, I'm not here to sit there and tell somebody they can or cannot do something. I think it falls into the same jurisdiction as a bronchoinhaler. While
others considered the practice unfair, as it meant fighters taking TRT did not suffer many of the effects of aging.
But when you have the knowledge of a 12-year veteran and you have a body of a 28-year-old, it's just not fair. It's not fair at all.
A number of fighters came out as using TRT publicly, including Dan Henderson, Todd Duffy, and Chael Sonnen.
All on doctor's recommendation, just to stay within normal limits and to have a healthier life. And
if you're going to associate a guy with TRT, make sure you also associate the fact that it's legal and it's not banned.
But the problem for many was just how easy it was to get a doctor to sign off on giving someone still in their 30s TRT.
All it took was for fighters to go to a doctor and get a letter to say that this fighter needs testosterone replacement therapy because his testosterone is low.
I mean, there's no need to mention names, but I know a guy who was in his 20s who was on TRT. It's like, what the if you're on testosterone replacement and you're in your 20s and you're competing in MMA, you shouldn't be competing in MMA.
Perhaps the most controversial user of hormone replacement therapy was Vitor Belfort.
When he was on TRT, he was a different kind of human being. He was just completely different than he is in any other circumstance.
Many suspected that Vitor had used steroids in his late teens and early 20s, and this had caused his natural testosterone to fall off a cliff when he was in his early 30s. So many fighters felt Belfort was being unfairly rewarded for cheating when he was younger, by being allowed to use TRT in his late 30s.
But then we just found out during camp he had a 1,200 testosterone score. I'm 10 years younger than him, and he's got a way higher testosterone level. This guy's still cheating. I'm going to make him pay for it tomorrow night.
The straw that broke the camel's back for many was when a juiced-up TRT tour was matched up with fan favorite Michael Bisping.
I mean, he's redlining his engine. It's like, bam! So he was going into that cage redlined. And that's who Michael Bisping fought.
What at first appeared to be a typical head kick knockout quickly transpired to be one of the worst injuries the UFC octagon had ever witnessed.
I think I've got a detached retina. And they said, well, why do you say that? I said, because when I put my hand in front of my face and wiggle my fingers, I can't fucking see them. And they went, yeah, you need to come in here right now.
So why was this allowed to happen? The truth of the matter is the UFC needed these aging stars to help build the UFC's popularity. Conor McGregor hadn't taken over the sport yet, and having legends like Dan Henderson and Vitor Belfort able to keep fighting was a big boost. But as the world became more aware of just how easily the rules surrounding TRT could be taken advantage of, the UFC and the NSAC called an end to the TRT era once and for all.
But, as I said, on February 27, 2014, the Nevada State Athletic Commission finally voted to ban TRT, and the UFC immediately followed suit.
With the age of TRT now in the rearview mirror, you could be forgiven for assuming the UFC's doping problems were in the past. However, the truth of the matter was that although the removal of TRT meant blatant abuse of drugs by old men was long gone, that didn't mean that the other athletes were not still taking full advantage of performance-enhancing drugs.
90% of the athletes in the UFC at this point were taking PEDs. Some form. Easily. And it was only idiots like me that weren't doing it.
The UFC was losing credibility fast. To combat this problem, they appointed a man called Jeff Nowitzki as Senior Vice President of Athlete Health and Performance in 2015. Previously, Nowitzki had worked on bringing down Lance Armstrong.
Lance Armstrong is probably one of the biggest frauds and cheats in professional sport.
And despite not being actually able to bust Lance, Dana and company felt he was the man to get the job done. As a result, the UFC partnered with the United States Anti-Doping Agency in July of 2015 to launch its new anti-doping program.
We knew, going into a drug testing policy like this one, there's going to be times where it ruins fights and things happen, but to clean up the sport and, to do what's right for the athlete. Listen, if you're hitting balls over a wall with a stick, who gives a shit if you're using steroids? But if you're in here fighting, another human being, and you're that much stronger, that much faster than they might be, it's very dangerous and it's the right thing to do.
USADA was known globally for its incredibly thorough approach to drug testing, And Jeff Nowitzki claimed they only care about cleaning the sport and don't care about the success of the UFC, revenue, and business-wise. But what truly makes USADA so different from other drug testing agencies is the amount of power they have over the fighters. Most notably, they have the right to test 365 days a year, anytime, any place.
You said, well, you know, we were wondering how stringent these new tests are. Turns out they're really good.
Turns out it's a pretty good test.
It's safe to say that when USADA's testing works, it's very good. Sometimes too good.
So you might be asking, Luke, have athletes been busted for drinking water that had trace chemicals in it that were of a performance-enhancing benefit? The answer is yes. That's on record. That's on USADA's website.
In 2017, USADA tested fighters 4,352 times. And while many saw this as a good thing, many resented the intrusions being made against them by the anti-doping agents working for USADA.
Why are you testing CM Punk when he's no longer in the UFC? Why are you going to Yuri Prochaska's house 50-something times? And really, that was all just a whereabouts thing.
In his world championship bout, Alexander Volkanovski was woken up the night before to be tested by USADA.
I was sculling water so I could hurry up and piss so I can go to bed. Couldn't get to sleep, so I took melatonin tablets. Woke up, still in a sleep cycle, and then just what you could. And now that you watch that fight, it probably makes a bit of sense.
Chael Sonnen was made to give samples to someone with no identification.
He takes me in there where I must derobe and present to him my penis because he watches. You know, now that's a very private thing.
No ID. He wants to see your dick.
Yeah.
They even watched Tim Kennedy shower.
Left and right. Remember when they had to watch Tim Kennedy shower nude? Remember that? Oh, well, athletes should have to go through this. Why should athletes have to go through these grotesque privacy invasions?
Yet another issue some had with how USADA operated was its heavy-handedness when it came to dishing out penalties on a seemingly inconsistent basis.
Remember, they ruined the career, he's not the only one, of Tom Lawler with their total bullshit fake science that wasn't good enough. They never apologized to him. They never made amends to him. They never did anything for him, and he wasn't the only guy.
And one of the reasons why they like him is because he got f***ed over by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Hardcore. They banned him for life for missing a drug test, which I just think is tyranny.
Furthermore is the debate surrounding fighters who sustain horrific injuries being allowed to take items banned on the substance list to recover, such as Conor McGregor after his gruesome leg break.
Like, the guy was essentially unrecognizable compared to traditional, Conor.
Yeah, he looked like a light heavyweight.
Yeah, it was like, to me, his face looked like the first time a guy takes gear. It's like, oh, wow, you've gained like 15 pounds of water.
Yeah.
One of the most disruptive aspects of having USADA around was just how many shows and main events would be canceled or swapped as a result of failed tests.
Come on. I'm so sorry. This is the way it should be. We have the best program in all of sports, and this is the way it should be.
And as if these problems weren't bad enough, there was also a considerable amount of speculation that wealthier athletes were still able to skirt around the strict USADA testing anyway.
They're all on fucking steroids. Well, it's not that easy these days with USADA,
hard.
but come on, some of them are on steroids.
Like, there's so much shit you can be doing nowadays that it's impossible for USADA and WADA to stay 100% on top of it. They can get as close as they can and get very, very, stay on track with shit as it pops up. But certain things they don't even know exist.
So Armstrong, whatever, if you've got the money to facilitate the doctors know more about it than the USADA. They're always one step ahead.
Exactly, yeah.
And when fighters weren't finding new drugs to evade testing, sometimes the US ADA just didn't test for seemingly obvious compounds anyway.
When you're competing at that altitude, or maybe Colorado Springs, or one of these really high altitude places, which we have events, Salt Lake City, and you don't test for EPO?
Yeah, no,
that's
insane.
Crazy.
Yeah.
When TJ Dillashaw fought Henry Cejudo, he was drug tested by USADA at weigh-ins.
I got suspended for 2 years. I failed the drug test.
Despite Jeff's best efforts to explain why they couldn't have caught TJ sooner,
It is accurate that EPO is a special analysis test, so it's not necessarily done on every sample.
Dana was visibly bothered by this and publicly voiced his frustrations about the program.
This one hurt you a little bit or bother you a little bit more?
Yeah, it bothers. Listen, we're spending all this money for USADA and to make sure that there's a fair playing field. So, I'm always 100% confident that if you're doing something, you're going to get caught. And that wasn't the case.
On top of all of this, there was even speculation that the USADA was experiencing issues surrounding corruption by using known drug cheats as informants and allowing them to continue competing unchecked in return.
If you help them catch people, then you could get away with using like full board testosterone, EP.
No, really?
Yeah.
All of this and more meant fans and fighters alike had begun to question whether the anti-doping program was working or even worth it.
Icarus, they were talking about that, the Balco scandal, all of that over the years. People are not confident at all in the efficacy of drug testing programs.
In 2023, Conor McGregor was still trying to make his comeback after his leg break. However, one thing was stopping him: USADA. It was heavily speculated that while he was away recovering, McGregor had taken some form of steroid to help him heal better.
That's when you should do it.
Oh, for
when you
sure.
have something like a catastrophic leg injury, I mean, he's got rods in his legs. He's had multiple surgeries. It's not just one.
Yeah.
Connor, is he gonna come back? I heard he hadn't got tested once this year from USADA.
See how
Yeah,
he's
I
looking?
did.
It's like, what the dude? He looks like a clean 195.
Since he wasn't currently in the USADA testing pool, this meant he wasn't failing any tests. But he would have to rejoin the program and receive a clean test for at least 6 months before he could compete again.
I was crystal clear that if they fight him within the 6 months, that was going to be a deal breaker to our relationship. And, a month or so later, that ended up them saying they wanted to go a different direction.
And when the UFC kept pushing for an exemption for Conor, USADA made a public announcement that they in the UFC would be cutting ties at the end of the year as a result.
Despite a positive and productive meeting about a contract renewal in May 2023, USADA says, the UFC did an about-face and informed USADA on Monday, October 9th, that it was going in a different direction. Okay? The relationship between USADA and UFC became untenable given the statements made by UFC leaders and others questioning USADA's principled stance that McGregor not be allowed to fight without being in the testing pool.
Furious that USADA went public like this, Dana went public condemning them as self-interested scumbags that no future sports organization should ever work with.
But a lot of people are not happy with USADA. Our deal is up at the end of the year, and we're working on going in another direction. And then especially after the dirty scumbag move that they pulled yesterday. They're looking to bring other sports leagues in. They were with us for 8 years. We helped put them on the map. They helped us build an incredible program. This is how you're going to end your relationship with us?
Hunter Campbell and Jeff Nowitzki also held a press conference to further refute the claims made by the USADA president.
He was incredibly disappointed that I informed him that we would not be continuing the partnership at the end of the year. So this wasn't a situation where he came to us and said, this is untenable and we can't continue. It was, hey, great to talk to you, looking forward to the future. And I said, look, as I've given you every indication over the last few months, I've been exploring different alternatives and I'm going in a different direction.
At this point, Hunter claims USADA decided to fabricate the story about McGregor to disparage the UFC.
And he ultimately made a comment to the effect of, you and Jeff are going to go out there and you're going to tell people that you can run a better program and that we are no longer the gold standard. And I replied, that's exactly what's going to happen because that's the truth. And I'm sorry that, he didn't like that answer, but that's the reality.
So, if USADA was so threatened by the UFC's new anti-doping program, what does it look like? Under the UFC's new testing program, athletes undergo no-notice sample collections by the Drug-Free Sport International. Whilst the UFC will brag that DFSI is a global leader in the anti-doping industry, collecting samples for FIFA, PGA Tour, and the NFL, that's not the full story.
What they're saying is Drug-Free Sport International does all the drug test collecting for all these other sports. And in a way to make this program more credible, essentially all Drug-Free Sport International does is collect the urine, collect the blood. That's all they do. That's their only role in this. They are a UPS, USPS, FedEx driver.
On a positive note, it does appear that the samples will be delivered to a World Anti-Doping Agency accredited laboratory. So at least the tests will be conducted independently, even if not to the previous standard of USADA. What's alarming though is who the UFC has chosen to make sanctioning decisions, which appear to be enforced by Combat Sports Anti-Doping and its president, George Piro.
George will make every
and I stress, every final decision in the program, that authority will be his and his alone.
The CSAD seems to be a new organization created especially for and funded by the UFC, with an underqualified president Piro chosen as its overseer.
This isn't a company that is known and has like a reputation of doing randomized drug testing. No, they just pulled a guy. Oh, he interviewed Saddam Hussein. He did an interrogation with Saddam Hussein. He was on 60 Minutes, not once, but twice. The UFC's created the company. The UFC's handpicked the president of the company who will oversee all decision-making with the company.
Oh, and he also trains out of notorious PED-using gym, American Top Team. Just to be clear. Since coming into effect, a number of fighters have already been caught out by the new testing system, so it's safe to assume that it's more thorough than the IQ drug tests of yesteryear. Now that USADA is a thing of the past, we're left to ponder a number of questions. Do we think the new system is a sufficient replacement? Is the UFC moving ever closer towards possible corruption? And to what extent did fans ever truly care about drug testing in the first place?
Let's see what the folks say who hammered me day after day after day about how this was necessary for the sport to exist. Let's see what happens when they part ways. You know what's going to happen to them in terms of what their changes are going to be? Nothing.
Well, one thing's for certain. Just as much as athletes will always try to push the limits of what they can get away with, the UFC will always do the same.